Uh, I want to start with an email that I received last night. This was from Drea Garcia, who is our bookkeeper. Hello, friends. Hope you are all doing well. I am writing to you in regards to the matter that was brought up to my attention, a situation in which I'm gravely confused about and professionally offended over. It was disclosed to me this afternoon that multiple board members have reached out to my main employer to ask questions about my skill set and validity revolved around my profession. This is absolutely unacceptable behavior, and as I am also employed by the Whiteaker Community Council, I did not give consent to reach out to an employer, and I was not informed that there was going to be a review of my employment, nor was I even aware that I was under some type of scrutiny with the organization. If there is a board decision, then I feel that I should have been part of the conversation. And if for some unknown reason board members took it upon themselves to put me under review with the community, then I'd like to have some kind of clarity on how this could happen. Just a quick reminder, there should never be backlash, slander, or consequences to speaking the truth as it is seen within a place of business, especially from a nonprofit set in place to protect the community. A community that I'm a part of. I have a business here. I presently work in 3 locations here. My daughter works here, and I have family and friends that are property owners and live here. I also volunteer a large portion of my time working with the organization along being employed by the Whiteaker Community Council. Please understand what is happening here now. Please help me understand what is happening and how the council intends to remedy the situation. In compassion, Drea. Did everybody hear that? So now I'm going to ask those multiple board members to raise their hand if they were the ones that reached out to her employer, her other employer.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Is this, are we beginning the meeting? Is this the public comment portion? Is that why you're reading that letter in at this time?
Yes. Okay. Well, then let's get started. I'm going to have Gail go ahead and
Are we still in the public comment portion? Because I have some questions that are outside the meeting agenda per se, but I don't want to jump ahead.
sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Firstly, can you remind me how long the public comment portion is when it ends? I noticed that we started a little late, so I'm not sure how much time we have.
We are actually at time at 7:10 on the agenda. I am seeing a beginning topic that you, Gail, are leading about the new nonprofit package seminar.
So will there be no further time for public comment tonight, even though we started late and there was a long pause and waiting for answer? I just want clarity here because I do have questions and this would be the time for me to ask them.
I'm going to let Dilenia answer that. I'm fine with whatever everyone else wants to do.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I spent some time this week reviewing our notes, such as they are online, and I just want to raise a few questions just now. We don't necessarily have to have answers for these tonight, but I think it's important that they be in the notes so that we can follow up with them. According to the notes of our meeting on August 18th of 2021, we approved money to buy a refrigerator. I never heard anything more about that refrigerator, and I'm curious where it is and what happened to it and where we're using it. The second question I had was, how are we keeping track of votes that were held via email? Is there a place that I can find those to review them? The third question is, we approved $3,500 for the mission on the 9th of March to build a ramp or whatever they were going to do with it. And I'm curious what happened with that. And I've noticed that the website has not yet been updated with the current board and other information, and I'm wondering what's going on with that. So those are my questions. Thank you.
So, start with question number 1. Sorry, there were a lot of
Question
them.
number 1 was, where's the refrigerator? Did we buy it? Are we using it? I'm presuming Doriandra has these answers and her hand is up. Question 2 was, how do I find what we've voted on in email and the results of those votes? Question 3 was, what happened with the money we gave the mission? Did we ever give it to them? And question 4 was, what's up with the website? I guess question 5 would be, what's up with the continuity binders? Did you want to answer that, Doriandra?
Sure, Gail. The refrigerator was never purchased because we needed it in a space that could house vaccine. And with the other activities at Alluvium and our space being upstairs in a warm area, it was decided not to purchase that as there wasn't a good place for it. Secondly, the check for $3,500 for the Eugene mission was given to them, and they were thrilled, and they've started preparations on the pad that's adjacent to the building to prepare to do the ADA ramp there. Those were the ones I had knowledge of.
Thank you, Doriandra. I appreciate that update.
Sure.
And then the mission that was sent out back in April, we received their tax information and thank you letter. And that was taken out of general funds. As far as the minutes are concerned, I think we all know that there was a issue with the old secretary. We let the new secretary get up to speed, and we have the minutes, but they need to be approved before they can be posted anywhere. So we've got to come up with a solution on how to give enough time so everybody can take a look at those minutes and prove them, and then we'll look at the next step after that.
Yeah, I'm clear on the process with the minutes. That's not what I was asking about. There have been several votes that were held via email under the part of our charter that allows us to vote via email so long as everyone votes. And I am unable to find any record of those votes or the result of those votes or who voted how on those votes. And I'm curious where those are, if they exist somewhere that I could see. That's outside of the minutes. Those are votes that we made in an email chain many times last year.
So Claire here, WCC secretary. I unfortunately don't have any information on records of votes by email from last year, since that was before my time. But I guess I have another question, not to pile on the questions, but would it be possible to batch approve notes? I kind of feel like we all just want to get on with our lives and just approve what needs to be done from last year and not keep going over and over. And also, Gail, I want to highlight that it is important to have a record of those notes and email, and that had not occurred to me. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm just not sure how to remedy that.
Well, I didn't actually expect answers for everything tonight anyway. And I don't want to keep us any later because we have a guest speaker this evening. Dilenia, would you like me to introduce our guest? Okay, well, hearing no objection, I presume we should move on with the agenda. My name is Gail Karuna-Vetter. I'm an at-large member with the Whiteaker Community Council, and I would very much like to welcome our attorney from the Center for Nonprofit Law, Cordelia Daniels. Cordelia is going to present for us this evening on our rights and responsibilities as a board. You should have all received an agenda earlier that will let you know exactly what topics she's going to cover, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. I am Cordelia's point of contact, so if you have further questions after her presentation, please feel free to reach out to me and I will make them into one document and pass them along to her. She's been very good at communication, so I'm sure she'll have some great answers for us and some great information for us this evening. So with that, I will pass it on to you, Cordelia. Please take over.
All right. Hi, everyone. As Gail said, I'm Cordelia Daniels. I work with the Center for Nonprofit Law. We are a law firm that only works with nonprofit organizations. And so, again, I'm here to present some nonprofit board topics. And I'm just going to dive in because I know that we're running a little behind and I want to make sure that people do have time for questions. So the first topic we're going to talk about today is a great starting topic, which is just how the organization, how the nonprofit can develop its board. And board development is not only the process of finding good board members and keeping them, it is also the process of developing your board members and supporting them. And one way of developing your board members is doing things like trainings and providing your board members with resources and information. So again, I'm giving a training, but other resources that are out there for nonprofit boards, there's bunches that are readily available. The Nonprofit Association of Oregon, NAO, also has lots of free resources about board service and board development, but hopefully the information I provide today will be enough, will be comprehensive for everyone. So board development, with organizations like yours, you have a pool of people who are eligible to be board members. You have your community members, and those are the people who are primarily going to serve on your board. You have a good size board. I work with organizations that have as little as 3 board members, and I work with organizations that have 35, 40 board members. Somewhere in the middle is a happy spot for organizations. I say that those 35, 40 member boards, that's hard. It's hard to wrangle that. But figuring out what the right size is for you is part of board development. Knowing how many board members it takes to run your organization can help determine how you recruit. The things to look for in board members are sometimes the very first one is just a willingness to serve. It isn't always easy to recruit board members. There's a lot of bad information, fears of serving on boards, and people just don't always have the time to give to an organization. And so the foremost thing that makes someone a good board member is that willingness to serve. The next thing that you want in all your board members is a dedication to the mission of the organization. If your board members don't care about your mission, then they're probably not going to want to attend the meetings and have any part in the lift that's involved with being a board member. From the board side, when you're looking to recruit new board members, when you're looking to have some transition and turnover in your board, some of the things you'll want to be able to communicate to prospects, to those people who you want to be able to recruit, to your members, to your community, are expectations. What do you expect from your board members? How many times do they meet a year? How many hours on average are you spending doing board work? That is one of the big questions people have. How much time are you really asking me to give? And this varies. Some nonprofits, it's 4 hours a year. Some nonprofits, it's 24 hours a year, and some it's more than that. It really varies from nonprofit to nonprofit, but getting a clear handle on that, averaging it out and saying, well, you can expect a 2-hour-long meeting every month. So 24 hours is what we expect from our board members, or 28, 30 hours a year is what we expect from board members. And providing them that information will help them make the decision, yes, this is a great fit for me. A job description is another great thing to have. What do you actually expect your board members to have? And it's okay if you don't have some of these things figured out today. I don't know a single nonprofit out there that has done absolutely everything that I would put on a checklist of what a board needs, what a nonprofit needs to do. So it's okay if you don't have a job description for your board members, but it's something that you could think about developing if you're going to really actively be recruiting board members. The final thing that I recommend is actually, again, back to that supporting your board members and evaluating your board. This isn't looking at your board with a negative view, oh, this board member isn't pulling their weight. It's actually looking at your board from a very holistic perspective. Who do we have on our board? What are we missing? What kind of voice would we like to have on our board that isn't represented? And can we recruit to make sure that we have the type of people on our board that are representing our entire community, that are really representative of the group that we engage with, so that our board is a representational board? In doing this, I also suggest that you can create a process of kind of a board mentorship. You have people on your board right now who were on the board last year. You have people on the board who have joined the board for the very first time. Creating a partnership between those long-term, those older board members, the longer in the tooth board members, and those new board members can be a way of sharing information and really getting those new board members up to speed in a way that is comfortable and friendly and doesn't feel like an overload of information. I know that it's been mentioned that there are some binders. That's great. Binders of information to share is always a good way of sharing that information and making sure you have that institutional history and better organizational longevity. And again, as a support for new board members who have joined or who have taken on a new role. That's really it for board development. I can't tell you where to look for those good board members. I can't tell you, oh, you know a good board member because of X, Y, Z. Unfortunately, it's not that clear. A good board member could be someone who is new to the community, but really passionate. A good board member could be somebody who's been there since the dawn of time and has a lot of knowledge and understanding of how the community has worked and the ebbs and flows. Both of those people could be good, and you couldn't create a rubric that necessarily defined those people. Rubrics don't tend to work. What does work is looking at your organization and saying, this is what we need right now, or what are our gaps in our knowledge and how can we fill them? But board development is also not something you're probably thinking about right now. You have a new fresh board, so hopefully you'll have a time to breathe before the next election. It isn't really too early to start thinking about it though, because one of the other things you can do to develop your board is really start communicating early and engaging with your members early, getting to know them so that you can say, you know, I really think you should think about joining the board. I've noticed you regularly attend our meetings. I've noticed you bring up great ideas. I noticed you ask good questions. Why don't you think about joining our board? That is the number one way you are going to find new people. And I would imagine that there are people here today, and that's exactly how they ended up, how they wound up on the board. So one of the first questions that your new board members might ask is, what are my duties? What is my responsibility to the organization? And at the highest level, you have 3 legal duties to the organization. These are your legal duties. You actually have to do these things, but they're not difficult to do. So your 3 legal duties are the duty of diligence, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience to law. The duty of diligence is also called the duty of care, and I personally call it the duty to investigate. And what the duty of diligence means, what it is that as a board member, when you're making a decision for the organization, you should feel confident and comfortable that you have enough information to make the decision at hand. So if the board is voting to sign a contract, at a minimum, you should have read that contract. That contract should have been shared with the board members who are going to say, yes, let's adopt that contract. Or enter into that contract. If you are deciding on a contractor to hire, at a minimum, you should be reviewing what that contractor has offered, what information they've shared. The duty of diligence can also require you to look outside the organization. So in most cases, these decisions are going to be made through research and conversation amongst the board, through your reading and discussing, oh, what does that language mean? What is the scope of work? Should we expand it? Should we shrink it? But it can require that you look outside the organization. For example, going back to a contract. If you had a contract you were entering into and there was language in there and you looked at it and you said, I don't know, is this right for us? You might want to contact an attorney so that attorney could give you a recommendation whether it was a good contract or whether you might want to ask for some changes. If you're discussing hiring a contractor and you're not quite sure about the scope of work, you might reach out to that contractor and say, hey, could you come talk to our board about the scope of work and why you think that fits what we're looking for? All of that falls in your duty of diligence. The second legal duty is the duty of loyalty. Oh, yeah.
So the situation that I just read about, we hired a contractor and multiple board members went outside and asked a employer about what her skill set was and validity of her profession. What would be your suggestion about that?
So the way to deal with that is internal first. As I said, these are conversations that happen at a board level first. Typically, and no matter what the circumstances are, you all have access to a contract, you're all deciding whether to enter it. You have a contractor, you're deciding whether to hire them. Or you have a contractor that's already been hired, but you're a new board member and you don't know what their credentials are. The way to address that would be initially to talk to the board. So you would bring it up at a board meeting or ask for it to be added to the agenda, and the board could discuss. Chances are the board has all the information that you need. But if you do not, if the board does not have enough information, or if that board member who brings it up says, I need more information, then it is a board decision. Okay, let's get that additional information. And then the board makes the decision to reach out. When we're talking about that specific circumstance, I would never recommend that board members individually go out and reach out to employers without consulting with the board first. Now, there are circumstances where a board member might want to get a second opinion. For example, there's a contract, they have a concern, the rest of the board says, no, we don't think your concern is valid. That board member may want to go and have that contract reviewed by an attorney. They could go do that, and then come back to the board and say, my attorney is concerned about this contract. But before they do that, they should say, I'm going to get a second opinion and share that information with the board. I don't think we've investigated this well. I'm going to get a second opinion. This is because of your second duty to the organization. So good segue, thank you. And that is your duty of loyalty. You have a duty of loyalty to the organization. When you are making decisions for the organization or representing the organization, your duty, your responsibility is not to your own business engagements, not to your own benefit, not to the benefit of other people that you know or care about. Your loyalty, your responsibility is to the nonprofit itself. And that can be hard to conceptualize. Having loyalty to a nonprofit, having a loyalty to this nebulous, floating, imaginary thing that we have all decided exists. But that is the fact there. By agreeing to be a board member, you have said, when I am making a decision, when I am representing the board, I am loyal to the board first. And doing something that undermines the board's ability to function is not loyal to the organization. And that's why that communication, that ability for the board to communicate with each other, to ask each other questions when they have questions, is so important. It's a two-way street. Board members need to be able to feel comfortable asking those questions. So it can happen, we accidentally shoot people down when they ask a question. Try not to. Be open to those questions, be open to the inquiries. You're going to learn so much, and take them seriously, look into them so that board members feel like they have done their diligence, that the organization has done its diligence, that the entire board has, and that they can move forward in loyalty to the organization. The final duty is the duty of obedience to law. This one is simple. When you are acting as a board member, you must obey the law. If you're not sure what the law is, your duty of diligence says, find out. So that one's not controversial. I would say the duty of loyalty isn't controversial, but it can be confusing. It can be hard to know. Well, we're going to hire someone to be a contractor and a really good friend, my neighbor, they're up for that contract. I want them to get the job, but they're actually not the right pick for the organization. Someone else is a better choice. Well, your duty of loyalty says pick the right choice for the organization, not your good friend, not your neighbor. All right. So moving on, those are your legal duties. But boards also do a whole spectrum of stuff that we call responsibilities. So you have legal duties to the organization, and they're minimal, they're simple, but you have responsibilities, and those can vary from organization to organization. But at a minimum, there are 5 responsibilities that all boards have. The board has the primary responsibility for approving expenditures and ensuring the financial health of the organization. So your responsibility as the board is to make sure that you are approving the money that is spent by the organization, and that you, if you are obligating, if you're entering into obligations for the organization, have a way of paying those obligations, those debts, or have a plan for how you're going to raise funds to pay those debts. That's really important. I always like to caveat here, that does not mean you always have the money to pay your debts. Sometimes you just have a plan. So I know nonprofits that have operated in the red and they just have a good plan for how they're going to get out. But if you don't have a good plan, you need to stop entering into contracts. You cannot spend your way out of a hole. I'm sorry if you thought you could, I'm here to disillusion you. You cannot spend your way out of a hole. So you need to be watching the organization's finances and making good financial choices for the organization. Your second responsibility of your 5 major responsibilities takes care of that. That is adopting a budget. If the organization is regularly, usually annually, adopting a budget and then cross-checking that budget periodically, at least quarterly is my recommendation, that you're going to be able to assess whether you are maintaining your financial health. You'll know how much you expect to raise in grants, in donations, in in other funding, and you know what your programs and activities are and how much money is going to be spent. Andrew raises a good point about cryptocurrency. I've been participating in a lot of legal education about cryptocurrency, and I would say the incidents of the last few days have said maybe not invest in cryptocurrency. But investment can actually be a really interesting topic for nonprofits if and when you get there, and how to do that in a financially responsible way. And that's a topic for a different day, though. So setting that budget and making sure you're keeping to that budget is really important. From time to time, though, you might discover you're going to go over budget. And then the board is responsible for actively approving that overspend, that reason why you're going to go over budget in that way, or for reallocating the budget. Well, we know we're going to spend more. Surprise, a pandemic happened and we're going to spend more on that than we are on other things we thought we were going to do this year. So we're going to reallocate the budget. Hopefully that's not something we have to deal with again in any short term. So those are 2 of the 5. The third responsibility is setting board policies. We're going to talk more about policies in a little bit, but that is actually one of the board's responsibilities. It does not mean the board has to write all of its policies itself, but the board should be looking at how it's operating and determining what kind of policies it might need. Then you need to adopt them. You need to adopt the policies you're going to have. If and when the organization gets to a point where it wants to start hiring staff, it is the board's responsibility to hire your primary staff person, your executive director. Yeah, that's what they're often called, though you could call them something else. And if you only have one, you're going to supervise them. The board will be their supervisor. But once you have a built-out staff, you will have someone who is the head of staff, the program manager, or the executive director, and then your job is just to supervise that one person and leave them to supervise the rest of your staff. I don't think you're there. I don't know if that is even something that's in the long-term plan, so I'm not going to spend too much time on staffing. But if it does come up in the future, just know that I am here to help you with that. The final of the 5 responsibilities is reviewing your mission and evaluating your effectiveness. Nonprofits are purpose-based organizations. They are mission-based organizations. You do not exist just to make money. In fact, that's probably not even something that you're primarily doing. You have a mission and you're driving towards it. And so the board needs to be regularly looking at their mission with a critical eye. Are the programs and activities that we are engaged in, that we are funding, that we are supporting our mission? And if not, is it because our mission isn't quite right? Or is it time to reassess the programs we're engaged in? And that can be a tough conversation. So I like to recommend that if you have the opportunity, you have what is known as a board retreat. This is a board meeting that no decisions will be made at. You will not vote on anything, but you will spend time together talking about your mission, reviewing the programs you ran in the last year, and talking about how they did or didn't drive towards that mission. For most organizations, this is a great and happy conversation because your programs are serving your mission, and it's a moment to celebrate. Look how much we have done. Look at how we are able to take our mission and make it real. Look at how we are able to impact our community through the good work we're doing, through the grant making we're able to provide, through the grants we've been able to raise and give out to people. So it can be really, really fun. It's also just a nice way to get together with your board members. I used to love it when it was in person and there'd be food, but if it's remote and on Zoom for safety's sake, then it's still a great way to have that conversation. All right, that's it, your duties and responsibilities. As I said, you may have other responsibilities that you decide as an organization. Perhaps your board members are responsible for doing some community engagement, for actually going out into the community and talking about the Whiteaker Community Council. Or perhaps your board members are responsible for finding new members. You get to decide that. And again, if you're able to craft a job description, that's a place where you can say, here's your responsibilities, here's what the board does, and flesh out what some of those additional responsibilities might be. All right. So I have a quick question. The next topic we're going to talk about is board committees and non-board committees. Do you currently have board committees? Great. All right. So there are two types of committees that organizations have: board committees and non-board committees. Board committees are committees that are made up of board members. Wow. We were really creative with our naming there. So board committees are committees made up of board members, and they typically have the authority or ability to make some decisions that have been delegated to them that are board level decisions, or they have the ability to bring really concrete recommendations back to the board. Perhaps you have a committee that is in charge of board development for finding those new board members. And then what they do is they bring those back. Here are the people we think might be good. You figure out how you're going to get them to run, how you're going to support them in doing that. Perhaps you have a board level committee that is part of a big fundraising event that you're going to do. And they have the authority to spend a certain amount of money or even enter into contracts on behalf of the organization. That authority is delegated to them, to that committee by the board. When you make that committee, you give them their authority, usually by resolution. You are allowed to spend X number of dollars. The other type of committee is a non-board level committee. This could be a committee that has some board members on it, but also includes members of your community, members of your voting membership, maybe members from other community organizations, community councils. And these committees do not have the ability to make decisions for the organization, but they are usually engaged in having really good advisory level conversations that they then bring back to the board. Topics, maybe they're researching something or getting information on something to bring back to the board so that the board has the information to, in good diligence, make decisions it needs to make. One of the committees you can have is what is known as an executive committee. Do you currently have an executive committee? Is your executive committee your officers? All right, that is standard, and typically it's what we recommend. Your executive committee is a committee of your officers. You can define some additional things that your executive committee is allowed to do, but overall, your executive committee has some authority to make the decisions of the full board. That is, in urgent situations or in between board meetings, they can actually make board level decisions. The organization itself can expand what the executive committee can do, or in some cases, it might limit what an executive committee can do. But the executive committee is really a good supportive element for any board, in that they can be more nimble than an entire board, especially a board of more than 5 or 6 people can be. So your executive committee does have certain requirements. They are supposed to ensure that they have a quorum in their decision making, so they would follow your same quorum requirements, although on that smaller, I believe it's 4-person scale. So they would need to make sure they're meeting those requirements and that they're voting. And then typically the executive committee would report back to the full board at the next meeting about what happened in their executive committee meeting or any decisions that they made. All right. Yeah.
Yes. Can you give me an example of what the officers, which is our executive committee, why they would need to make a decision by the 4 officers in this case, at this council. Can you give an example of why they
Why they might? Because for organizations that are meeting on a monthly basis, there might be a decision that comes up that has a deadline that is before the entire board could be brought together, even by special meeting. And so the executive committee could have the authority to enter into that decision, agree to that decision without having to call the whole board together. Because you can imagine in a special meeting circumstance, let's say we have a tight deadline, there's something, a grant that has to be submitted, perhaps the executive committee, seeing that deadline, which for some reason wasn't caught earlier, could vote to go ahead and submit the grant. Because if they tried to call a full board meeting, you wouldn't have the quorum in order to make that decision. So that's a circumstance. Another circumstance would be a true emergency situation where you might not be able to get everyone together. So if you had a facility, a building that you used and there was a leak, the executive committee could get together and decide that they were going to call a plumber out to fix that leak. There's a number of crisis level issues that could come up, and the executive committee could make a quick decision in order to address that issue. So that there isn't a bigger fallout from the lack of making a decision. And that would be a time when that would happen. But again, this is something that the board can expand and contract, though I don't generally recommend that you limit your executive committee too much. And I can send over the ideal description of an executive committee if you like, for the organization to look at. And I don't recommend limiting it more than that, just so that you can react to situations that you can't forecast at each board meeting. Yeah, Gail.
Yeah, Cordelia, on this topic of smaller meetings, can you speak a little bit to the issue of transparency and communication around board communication? In other words, what level of transparency is appropriate and ethical for communication between officers outside of the board via email or private conversation, or between board members themselves? I'm just curious to know where those boundaries are.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one because there's a lot of information out there that is applicable to public meeting organizations or governmental bodies that isn't generally applicable to nonprofits overall. And that is to say that board members don't lose any right by being a board member. So you can meet with and talk with other board members. You're not, some governing bodies, board members are not allowed to be in an elevator together, for example. I know I worked with a utility commission and the judges were not allowed to be in an elevator together. It was the commissioners were not allowed to be in an elevator together because of the conversation that could happen. That is not the case for nonprofits generally. If you are friends with, want to have conversations with people, you absolutely can. But you can only make decisions for the organization if it fits the requirements that you have set out for yourself. That is, if it's a board meeting, if it's a voting member meeting, or if it's an executive committee meeting that meets the requirements for your executive committee. Typically, there are things that each one of those groups cannot decide on, and so they cannot make those decisions. For example, the board generally cannot change voting member requirements without the voting members having a say in that. The executive committee couldn't vote to dissolve the organization without having the board involved in that conversation and then also having the voting members involved in that conversation. So there are some limits, but conversations, even discussing things, can be okay. Now, for transparency's sake, and to stop issues for nonprofits, I would say if the discussion is one that would be of interest to more than just you and the other person, have it at the board meeting. Have it in front of everyone else so that everyone else can get that same information. If you're finding out additional information, if you're doing research on your own, bring that information to the whole board, not to one or two other board members, so that everyone in their position of diligence can have access to that information and it can be shared. For executive committee as well, The best practice is, if at all possible, notice of an executive committee would be given to everyone. The executive committee will be meeting next week at 2 to make a decision in between 2 board meetings. In emergency circumstances, the law understands that might not be possible, but you would want to record that in the next board meeting. The executive committee met last Tuesday because they needed to address this emergency situation. They decided to whatever they decided, and then record that, unless it is a confidential topic that cannot be recorded yet. And that isn't very common. You can imagine a situation where they're making a decision and you can't put a name or something else in the document, but you could give the broader elements of the decision. They decided to fire that contractor, something to that effect, due to the emergency circumstance. I thought I saw another flicker of a hand, but maybe I imagined it. Was there another flicker of a hand? All right.
I'll flicker my hand. My hands are flickering. Yeah, I was curious if that was compliant with our charter, because like it didn't even occur to me that like, and I'm kind of embarrassed. This is great, by the way. I don't know if it's good for anyone else, but it's like, I really wish that I first had this training when I was a board member. So never too late, and just awesome to be able to share in this experience and learn. But yeah, like we've had to make like emergency decisions. And what we would do is have like a meeting of the officers when I was the chair, and then we would bring it to the entirety of the board. But we never made decisions just as like the 4 of us, partially because that wasn't the way that I wanted to lead when I was chair, but partially because like I didn't think that that was kosher. I believe that that's the legal term, kosher. The jokes don't get any better, by the way. This is what we're working with. So yeah, thank you, Dilenia. But yeah, I was just wondering if you could sunshine that a little bit, if our charter is compliant with that scheme, and I guess that, you know, different chairs as the head of both the board and the executive committee would have their own jurisdiction to be able to make those calls.
So no, typically you're not going to change what the executive committee can do based off of who happens to be the chair. So I would not recommend that. I will say that one of the reasons I asked if you have an executive committee is because it looks like your current charter is actually silent on that topic. And so you would be applying ORS 65, Oregon Revised Statute, Chapter 65, to determine what an executive committee would be. And truly, given that you have an executive committee, what you should be doing is adding that to your charter and describe what your executive committee is and who can be on it. And I'm now flashing ahead to the draft charter to see if it was in there, and I don't think it is in there either. So that could be something that gets added. It should be said in your bylaws what your executive committee can and can't do, what decision-making authority they have. And if it isn't said in your bylaws, yes, I think what you were doing is exactly right, Ian. You might be getting together to have a discussion and collect the information, but then the whole board would be having that decision made. Again, ORS 65 actually has a special section, the number I cannot remember, about emergencies. So even in that case, if there was a true emergency, something that an immediate decision would mean if you did not make an immediate decision, the outfall would be very detrimental to the organization, you could still make that decision. And you don't have to worry, even, you know, if your bylaws say the executive committee can only make absolutely urgent decisions, or even if it doesn't say that, there is a provision in ORS 65 that allows the officers to make urgent, truly emergency decisions. But it means that it would have to be a truly urgent decision. It means it would have a detrimental effect on the nonprofit not to make that decision without the full board.
Thanks so much. And I also have a recording now of an attorney telling me that I'm exactly right. So I'm going to send that to all of my ex-girlfriends to resolve some of our previous arguments.
What you have to do is then edit it. So no matter what it is you say, you could just be like, Ian, you're so
exactly
great.
Right.
And then it's me saying, you're exactly right.
You're exactly right. Cool. Thanks, Cordelia.
I can do that for everyone. So if you want me to tell you you're exactly right, just tell me your name and I will say it. I can't guarantee that. All right, so that is the executive committee. As you can see, my recommendation is now that you add some language to your charter that reflects how you plan to have your executive committee function. And again, don't vary it. Whatever it is that you want it to be, you want that to hold true for any future board, though of course they could amend the charter. Gail, you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick clarifying question. I see that there's a comment in the chat that this is already in the draft we've submitted, but you said you could not find it. In the event that it is not there, which I don't necessarily want you to check right now, is that something that would be easy for us to add as an addendum later?
Yes, we can absolutely add it. And again, I said I didn't see it, but I flipped the pages very quickly because I had not thought to check that before this meeting. Yes, Jennifer.
No, we don't use the term executive committee. We're using officers.
Yes.
So we do have words in there pertaining to the officers, which, do you think we need to change it to executive committee?
So you don't have to say executive committee in those words, but you need to have a provision that allows for the officers to meet and make decisions, if that is the case, outside of the general meeting. So of course the officers can get together and have conversations. If no decisions are made, that's perfectly fine. But if you're going to give them the authority to make decisions, then I do recommend calling it something like an executive committee, and I do recommend putting that directly in the bylaws. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Of course. All right. So the next two topics are actually connected. The first is preventing confidentiality issues. This is always a hot topic for boards. What are your confidentiality requirements? What are you allowed to talk about in a board meeting, out of a board meeting, wherever you may be? Generally, for confidentiality's sake, I recommend clarity. If there is information that you do not want shared outside of a board meeting, if there is a contract or other thing that is being considered by the board and you don't want the board to be sharing it or discussing it with people who are not on the board, I do recommend making that clear and saying this should not be shared. But the standard practice actually should be for all board members individually to not share something unless it is already public knowledge. So while I'm saying say it, all board members individually should approach the situation as if everything is confidential. Now, this is a little bit weird because I read that this meeting is being recorded and is going to be made publicly available. So it's likely that all of your board discussions are pretty public and maybe nothing is necessarily confidential. And in that case, that requirement, that desire to have you say, all right, we're entering into an executive session, the information in this is confidential. That is a clear line for all the board members. And what is discussed in that meeting is not public knowledge until the board decides they want that knowledge to be public. Confidentiality issues also come up with data retention and the records you're keeping. So if you are keeping data and records, membership roles, all of that information, first, only collect the information you actually need. I know organizations that have their members' social security numbers, driver's license numbers, home addresses, next of kin, right? Don't collect all of that. What do you need to be able to verify that they are and can be a member? Their name, the address of their business, or the address of their home. There you go. You have enough information to be able to verify that they get to be a member. You don't need their social security number. I generally say never collect it unless you have to. But if you do collect information, come up with a plan for destroying it once you don't need it. So when someone is no longer a voting member, when someone leaves the membership, what is your timeline for destroying that? Yeah, Ian.
So we've collected information in the past regarding gender identity of board members, sex of board members, sexual orientation of board members, age, income level. And while that may seem a little or very obtrusive, actually it's super helpful to be able to understand how representative we are of the community that elected us to represent them. Some of the data that we have collected in the past is also corollary to the census data that happens each decade. But some of the data we collect isn't, like sexual orientation, gender identity, previous homelessness status, and if you were homeless or previously unhoused with children. All this is really helpful when organizations are considering the board for grants. So just kind of wanted to share that a little bit really quickly. Don't know if we've done that as a board this cycle, but we did it last cycle. And it was really helpful when potential grantors were considering us. They're like, oh, this board's elected by the community. How actually representative is the board of the community that they represent? And last year, we did pretty good. You know, we didn't hit every category. I mean, we're pretty good with the renter representation by the percentage of us that were living at or below the federal poverty rate, the number of us whose ethnicity was Latina, Latino, Latinx, and we kind of outpaced things like the number of board members who were previously unhoused, the number of board members who self-identify as LGBTQIA+. So I just wanted to share that a little bit because it it seems like a lot of information to ask. We don't ask like your favorite weed strain or where you go on vacation when you're 7. But yeah, that kind of like orientation information and ethnicity and identity information, super helpful for some funders when they're making funding decisions.
Yeah, and it can be, and I would draw a line there that you are asking that of your board members, not of your general voting members. I would also say that if you're collecting that data, find a way to, what is the term for it? Where you extract the actual personal data and just leave the important information. So
de-identify it?
Yeah, de-identify it. Thank you.
Yeah, I have very affordable rates for helping attorneys find language. So we'll work that out later. I'll show you. Yeah.
You know, it's 8 o'clock, and so we're gonna lose our words. That's what's gonna happen. But yes, I recommend if you can do that for the long-term record keeping. Maybe you want to show how you've made improvements over time. So for this board member, this board group for this year, you might know who's who, but then make that information, separate that information out and keep it for your records, but no longer attach it to the individual who it's from. And I would also say, if possible, make it voluntary. You know, there may be reasons, broader reasons why people aren't able or willing to disclose certain information. You know, we are lucky we live in Oregon, but there could be information in the future that people don't want necessarily to be on the record somewhere that's connected to them for one reason or another. So I do recommend you make it voluntary, though it can be very helpful in grant making to be able to say, we have a broad and varied board. Right? I saw multiple questions. So Dilenia and then Jennifer.
So being from the Caribbean, and to be honest with you, of Latin descent, a lot of us are taught to hide. Some of our family members can't hide. They have the color, they have the look. There's no hiding. My name is always D. Cardona when I'm applying for things. I use my husband's last name, so I wouldn't have to. So it's a sensitive area for at least my family. It was. So yeah, as far as the information that was gathered from last year, you're saying just take the personal information out of it.
Yeah, take the name off of it. And so you could say, on last year's board, we had people from, we had individuals from these types of backgrounds. We had 2 individuals who had at any point been houseless. We had 2 individuals who, were non-binary, whatever it is, but you wouldn't be attaching it to the individuals anymore. Now, obviously, when you're collecting that data right now, you're going to know who the people are who are submitting it, but you can quickly, before you make it a record, remove that identifying information from it. Some of
Would
it
that
is
be
hard.
email?
Some of it is hard to remove. You know, if somebody gets that information, a grantor gets that information and then looks at your board, they may be able to put some of that information, faces to the information. Grantors aren't really doing that though, and that's where you're using it.
Thank you.
Jennifer?
Oh, yes, thank you. I forgot my question. Oh, here it is. Who normally would be assigned that job of collecting information? Would it be the secretary, you know, chair, the vice chair, one of our officers?
It depends on the organization. So that isn't something that necessarily falls into the job of any one officer, though the organization could decide this year, our secretary, for example, is going to collect this information. They're going to send out a survey, everyone fill it in and get it back by the end of the month. So it could be the secretary collecting that information, but it could be any board member who the board itself feels is the right person, or who has the time or bandwidth or perhaps a specific skill set in order to do that. In a nonprofit I am involved in, they have someone who's really good at making, you know, forms and then turning everything into beautiful like charts and graphs and things. And so that person is actually the person in charge of collecting that data. They're not an officer, they're just a member of that board, and we appreciate their work. So it depends. It's not a definite person who has to do it, though it does typically end up with officers unless there's someone else who's willing to take that work on.
Thank you.
All right. So again, though, the summary there with that confidential information is to make sure you destroy things when you don't need them anymore. So that brings up the policy check, which is the next topic. There are a number of policies that we do recommend organizations have. If you do not have the policies we recommend today, do not panic. These aren't a legal requirement that you have all of these policies. Most of them are best practice policies. A few of them are policies that the IRS really wants you to be able to say, yes, we have them. So when you're filing your 990, a couple of these policies are actually mentioned on the 990 itself. They will say, do you have a conflict of interest process? How do you ensure your board members are dealing with conflicts of interest properly, right? So that brings up the first one, conflict of interest policies and procedures. If you don't have one, I recommend getting one. But if you do, I just recommend that you follow it. When you're dealing with conflicts of interest, follow your conflict of interest policy. Do you have a conflict of interest policy? No.
Last year's board approved all of the policies that you recommended for us, and they were to have been in the continuity binders, but we didn't get those finished in time for the election, but they have been approved and accepted by the board.
Perfect. All right. So then that answers 4 questions for me today, which is I know that you've adopted the 4 policies that the IRS cares about. So the conflict of interest policy is in there, and the conflict of interest policy, just to give it a quick summary, really is that if a board member or a board member's close family or business partner stands to make a financial gain from the organization's decision, that person has a conflict of interest. It's not illegal to have a conflict of interest, but in the case of a conflict of interest, that person cannot vote. The rest of the board gets to vote on it, but that person should not be voting on that topic. So if you were going to hire a board member as a contractor to perform service, that board member should not be voting on that. If you were going to hire their spouse, partner, or child, they should not be voting on it. And they just abstain from voting on that particular issue. The next policy would be a document retention and destruction policy. Oh, is that a question, Jennifer?
Yes, I need a little clarification.
Yeah.
If you can have a family member work with the board on doing a job, and that wouldn't be a conflict of interest, so long as that person that's related to that person doesn't vote.
So it is a conflict of interest But what a conflict of interest means is that person doesn't vote. So yes, your partner could work for the organization. You, in some capacity, you just don't get to vote on their hiring, the amount that they'll get paid, any of that information. To dive a little bit deeper, the board itself, the rest of the board, will want to make sure it's doing diligence and making the right decision for the organization. And it can be difficult when conflicts of interest come up to do that. You feel a lot of camaraderie with your board members, your fellow board members. So you may want to say, oh, well, Cordelia is a good board member. Let's hire her daughter to do some work for us because, you know, we love Cordelia. But your duty of loyalty says, is my daughter the right fit for what you're looking to hire? Have you made sure my daughter charges fair fees for her services? Have you made sure that you couldn't get a better service from someone else? So getting comps, getting quotes from other people who do that work is important. So all of that wrapped up in your loyalty to the organization and in your diligence requirement, making sure that you've done enough research to ensure that the nonprofit is getting a fair deal whenever there's a conflict of interest. We'll say my daughter is 2.5. I don't know what you're hiring her for, but she cannot do it. She's terrible at it, whatever it is. All right, Dilenia, did you have another question? No, okay. All right, the next policy is the whistleblower and record retention policy. Whistleblower and non-retaliation policy. This policy, again, IRS wants you to have adopted. It says if someone blows the whistle, that is, if someone in good faith brings a concern to the board. Board members, I think we're breaking the law. I read this article that says nonprofits are supposed to, whatever it says. If someone in good faith blows the whistle, they bring a concern that the board is violating the law, breaking the rule in good faith, then the organization, the board, should respond by saying, thank you so much for bringing that to our attention. We will look into it, and then you need to look into it and let them know the outcome. So actually look into it, let them know the outcome. You brought to us that we were breaking the law. Good news, we looked at it, we looked closely at the law, and it's common misinterpretation, but actually we're fine. We have this policy that deals with it and we're doing just fine. Truly, that is the most common answer. Whistleblowers are frequently wrong, but that doesn't mean that they're doing it out of spite. Most whistleblowers blow the whistle because they love the organization and they're worried about it. So keep that in mind. Remember that when someone raises an issue like that, they are doing it because they love the organization and they are concerned for the organization's health. So look into it, let them know the outcome. Then you must ensure that they're not retaliated against. In other words, if they're a volunteer, don't say they can no longer volunteer with the organization. If they're a board member, don't kick them off the board just because they blew the whistle. They don't get reelected. That's just an election cycle, but don't kick them off. Don't start ignoring them because they blew the whistle. If they were a contractor, it's not a reason to terminate the contract because they brought a concern to you. So do make sure that you're protecting your whistleblowers. The final of the 4 policies that the IRS wants you to have adopted is a travel and related expenses policy. And that is to say, if the organization requires board members to travel, you can reimburse them for those travel expenses. So if it's for the organization's purposes, you can reimburse them if the organization decides to. Not all organizations can afford to reimburse for board member travel. If you make the decision that you're going to do it evenly. So it could be that you say every board member who has to travel over 25 miles on board jobs, doing something for the organization, can have mileage reimbursement. But apply it evenly so that it isn't, oh, well, we will reimburse, and I'm just picking on people. We will reimburse Claire when she travels, but we're not going to reimburse. Some of you all have the same name. It is cruel to me to just see Whiteaker Community Council. So I'm sorry, Jennifer. We're not going to reimburse Jennifer when Jennifer travels. So make sure you're applying your rules fairly and evenly. Other policies you might want to consider are safety and risk management policies, especially if you have events. If you have events, you want policies for how people are expected to engage with those events. If you have volunteers, what are your volunteers expected to do, not do? Are you having them sign liability waivers? Do you have safety information that you can provide them? Things like, while you're volunteering, no running, no climbing ladders, or maybe they're required to climb ladders, who knows, but having policies around that. Budgetary policies can be really important for an organization. Financial policies and fundraising policies are the other really big ones. If you ever get to the point where you're hiring employees, you're going to need personnel policies, grievance policies. You may even want grievance policies sooner. You have a sizable board. Perhaps you want to have a procedure for how you deal with inter-board conflicts. If you don't already, you may want to think about how you would deal with those situations when they arise, if you see that being an issue. All right. That is the end of the first portion of the training. It is not the end. And I'm just doing a time check here. Your next topic begins at 8:40. Okay, I'm moving, I'm trying. All right, so hopefully everyone is still with me or still in it. All right, we're gonna move to the next topic. This is a great one. This is lobbying. Right now, I feel like this is the hot topic, but that's just because I'm really watching what's happening out there in the world and wondering how I can get my organizations to engage with it. The organizations I'm part of, not the organizations I advise. I'm not going to force you to do anything. But we're going to talk about lobbying. To begin the topic of lobbying, I'm actually going to talk about something that is not lobbying. Because there's a lot of confusion about what lobbying is. 501c3 nonprofits are prohibited. You cannot engage in political campaigns and political activities. That is, you cannot support political candidates and you cannot support political parties. So you cannot come out and say, Whiteaker Community Council supports Cordelia Daniels for president. Even though I know you all are signing up to support me individually, you cannot do it as an organization. So keep that in mind. That is not considered lobbying. That is political campaigning, political activities. That is what is forbidden. But because there's a prohibition on that, many people think that nonprofits cannot engage in any lobbying activity. You can, you absolutely can. Nonprofits can engage in what is known as an insubstantial amount of lobbying. And that is generally, for most organizations, 20% of your gross revenue can actually be spent on lobbying activities. And this lobbying is made up of direct lobbying and indirect lobbying. Direct lobbying is reaching out and talking to the legislature. That is where you have coffee with someone, a member of the legislature, or you have a lobbyist who works for the organization that you pay to go to Salem and convince them to do things, or talk to people in Eugene to get measures passed or to engage in that work. It could be emails or phone calls directly to the legislature. That's direct lobbying. So you can have a total of 20%. Direct lobbying can be all 20% of it, or you can get engaged of that 20%, 5% of it can be this indirect lobbying. Indirect lobbying is also called grassroots lobbying. And while it can only be 5% of your overall lobbying budget, that 20%, grassroots lobbying is also the cheapest type of lobbying. Grassroots lobbying is things like posting something on your Facebook page, support ballot measure X. Whiteaker Community Council supports this ballot measure that will help support community councils all over Eugene, or will help support local artists, whatever it is, you can do that. And 5% of your gross revenue can be spent on that type of lobbying. That is perfectly fine, that is perfectly legal. If you realize that you are going to spend more than 20% of your gross on lobbying activities, there are two options. One, you will potentially have to pay an excise tax on anything over 20%. So 21%, and you pay an excise tax on that 1%. Or it's time to consider, do we want to start a partner 501c4 organization that can do the lobbying we need to do? And that is an option. 501c4s can do unlimited lobbying. There is no limit. Yes. All right. Duncan asked, a Facebook post is zero cost. How does that work with the 20% rule? Yeah, this is my favorite question. So it does. It has zero real money cost that we can put a finger on. But the way I tell organizations to think about this is beyond the actual cost. For safety's sake, to really protect the organization, I say make sure it's 20% of your gross revenue or 20% of your activities. So it needs to be the lesser of both of those. You need to make sure that if your board members are doing something, less than 20% of their time, because your time is free to the organization. It's not free for you, but it's free to the organization. Make sure that less than 20% of your time is spent doing that. Or for things like Facebook posts, less than 5% of the organization's time should be spent putting up ballot measure posts or other things on the Facebook page. The next question was, can the WCC draft and promote ballot measures? You can. That would be a form of lobbying that would likely fall within direct lobbying, except in certain circumstances. So there are a couple exceptions where things that look like lobbying are not lobbying. Providing analysis, research, and education that is even is not lobbying. So if you say ballot measure X, if you vote for it, it means this. If you vote against it, it means this. That's not lobbying, that's education. You can do an unlimited amount of that. If you are responding to a written request from the legislature, that's not lobbying. So if someone reaches out and says, we want to know what Whiteaker Community Council has to say about this, could you write onto this? Could you add to this? Could you comment on this? That's not lobbying, you're responding to a request. And if you're challenging or supporting a measure that directly impacts you as an organization, in that it would remove your 501c3 status, that is not lobbying. So if there was a bill that was to say, we don't think community councils should be allowed to be 501c3s anymore, you can do endless amounts of campaigning against that. It doesn't count as lobbying, that's preserving your status. But to get back to the question, drafting and promoting a ballot measure would typically be lobbying. So yes, you would want to make sure that it falls in that 20%, that overall 20%. So if you're paying someone to do it, or if people are spending 20% of their time on that work, you would want to keep it, again, under that 20% amount. I am just going to turn my screen off for 1 second so I can turn my light on. Apologies. Apologies, it was getting very dark in here. All right, so that's lobbying. Any other questions on lobbying? All right.
I have a question.
Oh, yes,
I'm sorry. I keep raising my hand when you put your head down. There was a question one of our city council was having some issues, and a couple of board members wanted to support them and stuff like that. Would that be kind of considered the lobbying part, right? If it's for a specific individual?
It depends. So if you're supporting someone and it looks like you're supporting someone who has a clearly defined political party or political affiliation, so you're supporting the Democrat, then you can't do it as an organization. But that brings up an interesting point, which is a reminder that you do not individually lose your rights to support whoever you support. So you can individually come out in support of anyone you want. You can individually all support me for president and put on your individual Facebook pages, vote for Cordelia for president. You just can't say, I'm a board member of the Whiteaker Community Council and I support Cordelia for president. But it sounds like it was kind of bridging that gap where they wanted Whiteaker Community Council to come out and support that that person. I would say you would want to be careful there, again, because if there is a party affiliation, it could look like you're supporting them as a political candidate. If it's a non-affiliated position where they don't have a political party attached to them, then there's not that risk. And it wouldn't actually be lobbying unless you were saying we support their run for whatever post that they are running for.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. So the next topic is the rules for websites, links, and acknowledging donors. So on your website, you may have a number of resources, and that's great. That's what we want to see. And you may have a lot of information for your community and for the greater community. What we want you to watch out for on your website are things like selling things. So do you sell anything on your website? All right, you've just avoided one of the big issues there. Now, some nonprofits do sell things on their website. Oh, sorry, Dilenia.
Yeah. If we had a business page of the businesses that are here in the Whiteaker, is that considered, we're still not selling anything?
If you just listed all of the business that are there, that's fine. Yeah, that's not selling that. That's not even promoting them. That's like a resource list. Now, if you started to pick and choose who could be on that list and you were like, well, we like these businesses, but not these ones, that can get a little bit iffy because it looks like you're supporting them. And then there could be questions about how you're using your funds for personal benefit, those businesses benefit. But if it's just a list of here's all the businesses in our community and here's what they offer, that's fine. I would avoid doing things like advertising for the businesses. Providing a listing is not an advertisement. So this brings us right into the middle of this topic. But saying things like shop at Cordelia's, her clothes, the clothes she sells are the cutest. That would be an advertisement. You've just added an opinion to it. And so that's one of the key things. If you have a page that is a resource list, great. It can even include their own slogan. So if I have Cordelia's Closet and it is a clothing store and my slogan is our clothes are the cutest, you could include it. That's my slogan. That's okay. But you couldn't add, we think her clothes are the cutest to that line. I see your hand hovering. Go ahead, Dilenia.
We often we have a Facebook page also where a lot of, the Whiteaker community businesses kind of hit us up and then we just kind of post their stuff. Is that still okay to do? Yeah, Facebook has opened this interesting world in that very often you are just posting whoever sends you something. And I would say where I've seen the IRS come out on this is as long as you're posting any, the same type of thing that anyone submits. So if any business submits, we're having a sale and you post it, that's fine. But if you start making just decisions about whose sale posting you post, that could create an issue. That doesn't mean you have to post everything a business sends to you. If a business wanted you to post something that was offensive or went against your own organization's purpose or mission, you don't have to post it. But if you post something for one organization, you should post that same type of thing for any other organization that would submit it. Thank you.
So if you're not selling things on the website, I'm not worried about that. If you ever are going to, be careful. It can raise unrelated business income questions. So we should talk about it before you do it. And then if you're going to acknowledge donors, I don't know if you do acknowledge donors, thank the people who give you grants, if that's part of anything that you're doing. But if you do, you absolutely can. You can say thank you to donors. You can say thank you to people who give you money. But again, don't advertise for them. So thank you to our donor, but not thank you to our donor, the Center for Nonprofit Law, the best law firm this side of the Mississippi. That it looks a lot like an advertisement and is also a really funny way to say we're the best. Go ahead, Dilenia.
So would it be fair to, like, let's say we decided at some point on our website to make a donors page where we're saying, thank you, but here are the places and the people who don't do that?
No, you can. Thank you. Thank you to these businesses. It can even be their slogans or their logos. So thank you to all of our supporters, and it's the name of their business or their slogan or their, you know, like their logo, their graphic design image that they provide you with, or just their name. If you want to, you absolutely can. I would say before you do it, ask the donor if it's okay. Not all donors want a public thank you. Some people want to give money and have nobody know that they did it. Now, your 990 may require disclosures about it, but they might not want it on your website. So before you engage in that activity, I would actually have that conversation with your donors. We have a thank you page. Would you like to be listed on it? And let them answer that. Just
is it something that we should get in writing if they do want to be on the page?
No, you can absolutely do it as part of the grant, the gift process, where they get a letter that says, you know, thank you. If you would like to be listed on our page, please sign this and send it back. And so they have to affirmatively accept it. But if they say verbally that they are okay with it, that's fine. Again, though, if they reached back out and said, I want it taken down, take it down. That's just good donor relations. Keep the people who give you money happy, to the best of your ability and within all legal limits.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions about that? I don't see risks on your website. The big one is when people start using your website to sell things, or they have really elaborate advertising for their donors or others. The next topic is legal advice donors need to take advantage of contributions. This could actually be a huge topic. But I'm going to try and keep it minimal so that I keep you on time while still touching on the big things. My first piece of advice is that if a donor comes to you and wants to know anything about their taxes, your answer is, we can't answer that question. You should talk to a tax professional. That is step number one. Step number two is there is some information you can share with donors. And that is, if somebody donates $250 or more to the organization, they need to get a donation receipt. You should be sending them a receipt which has certain information on it, that you're a 501c3, your EIN, your full written legal organization's name, how much they donated. If they're donating in-kind goods, they may also need some additional information. In-kind goods are when people donate things. Instead of giving money, they give you an object with value. So at the beginning of this meeting, there was talk about a refrigerator. But if instead of buying it, I donated it. I knew you needed a fridge, I donated a fridge to you. That's an in-kind donation. Now, in order for me to take full tax advantage of that donation, there are certain levels that require additional work by the donor. And it can be really important to share that information with them if they're not a savvy donor, someone who does a lot of donations. If it is worth $500 or less, you just need to give them a receipt and they fill in the value. They actually get to decide what the value is. If you've ever given stuff to places like Goodwill or Salvation Army, they give you what is really a blank receipt. You fill it in, and that's because you're probably going to take less than that $500 value. If they're going to claim $500 or more, $500 to $5,000, they're going to need some independent way of proving that value. That is, I would need a receipt that showed that the refrigerator I donated to you was brand new and purchased and cost $3,000. I have no idea what a refrigerator costs. I hope my refrigerator didn't hear that, because if it finds that out, it will just break, and forcing me to find out, right? So I donate a refrigerator, it's worth $3,000. I prove that by having the receipt that shows it was a brand new purchase that I just directly gave to you. If I'm going to try to claim that is worth more than $5,000, I have to have an appraisal done by a person who is certified to appraise that type of item. So I am donating an antique piano. I think it is worth $7,000. I need someone who is knowledgeable in the area of pianos to appraise it and say, yes, it is. And they actually have to fill out a specific IRS form saying, yes, it is worth that. And so those are the key things. Those are the key bits of advice to remember to tell your donors. First, we're not going to give you any tax advice. Second, here are some points that you might, pressure points, if you're donating things that have a value that are not cash. All right. Does anyone know what the most common pitfall is when you are soliciting tax deductible contributions? What is the most common mistake people make? That's okay. You don't have to answer. It is almost 9 o'clock. The most common mistake is that people believe that they can donate services and get a tax deduction for them. People cannot donate services and get a tax deduction for the value of those services, even if they have a clear way of providing evidence of what their service costs. This one creates so much confusion for people everywhere. And if you vote for me for president, I promise it is the first thing I will change. So if somebody says, I want to donate my services to you, I'm just going to take a tax deduction, you need to tell them, no, you can donate your services to us. We're happy to take your service for free, but you will not be able to take a tax deduction for the value of your services. Again, that's even if they can prove independently what the value is. I can prove independently what the value of my services is, but if I was doing this for free, I can't take a tax deduction for that value. The IRS will not let me. And so that is a really important one to communicate with people who bring up the topic of donating services. What they can deduct is the costs, the actual costs associated with the donated service. That is, if I donated, I was a plumber, you had a leak, I came and fixed it, my services, I'm going to charge you for, but what I'm going to donate to the organization is the cost of the segment of pipe I had to replace and the amount of whatever it is that I had to do to, anything I actually purchased that I have a receipt for, that I donated to the organization and I can get a tax deduction for. But that is a key one, and that is the most common pitfall, is saying, sure, you can get a tax deduction for your services that you give us. You cannot. All right. The next one you have is IRS hot topics and fundraising, but those actually are the hot topics in fundraising. So it is duplicative, and I should fix that on our sheet that we send out. The next one is professional fundraisers. You can hire people who are professionals who do fundraising for nonprofits. These are people who go out and either perform fundraising events or otherwise engage in fundraising for the nonprofit itself. There are some really important things to know about professional fundraisers. First, they can be required to register depending on the level of fundraising they're doing. And if they truly are professional fundraisers, they will need to register with the state government that they are performing fundraising activities. And that's so that the state can monitor. There are a lot of people who say they are professional fundraisers who are not. So that's the second thing about professional fundraisers. This is an area where you need to do your diligence. This is an area where you want to look at the people who are saying they're going to do this for you. And you're going to want to interview them, talk to the people who recommend them, talk to other organizations they've worked with, verify them to the best of your ability, figure out if they are legitimate, look at their website, all of that. It can be helpful if they are registered because they can say, look, we're already registered. The state has already done that check. There's a question, does it cost anything to register as a professional fundraiser? And I actually don't know the answer to that. I would imagine it does. Registering to do just about anything costs money at the state level. They usually have at least a filing fee, which typically is in the range of $50, but it could potentially cost more than that, and I don't know the answer. The other thing to know about fundraisers is a thing to watch out for, and that is if the fundraiser says, I'm going to tie my payment to a percentage of the money I raise, they're probably not a good fit. It is not illegal for them to do that. That is to say, I'm going to make, I get 25% of all money I raise for the organization. It is not technically illegal, but it does violate fundraiser ethics. So if they truly are a professional fundraiser and they are part of the fundraising community, they won't do that. They will charge you a flat fee or a monthly fee or however they have a fee structure, but it won't be connected to the amount of money they're raising for you. And this is first a violation of fundraising ethics, but it can also trigger a closer look by the IRS because it could end up being a prohibited benefit to that person. If they make more money than they should, that is, there's a value to their service, but because you are a great organization and you are able to raise so much money, they end up making a lot more money than they typically would, or that you would generally have to pay for that service. That looks like they've received an unearned benefit from the nonprofit, and that can have tax consequences and penalty consequences for them individually, and it can have implications for the organization itself. It could trigger an audit or other look from the IRS. So again, the contract says 10%, 25%, 30% of all the money I raise, look for a different. Ask them if they'll change that or look for a different fundraiser. The last topic, and I know I'm over, and so I apologize. I will do this very quick. Oh, Jennifer, you have a question?
Yes, I'll try to be quick. Can you give us an example of where successfully it has been done using a fundraiser?
Where it's been successful.
Are you aware of it from your experience?
Yes, lots of nonprofits are successful using fundraisers. The ones that typically are successful using fundraisers, professional fundraisers, are ones that need real assistance running fundraising events. So maybe it's that they want to run a series of raffles or a series of bingo events, and they really need assistance running that. Having a professional fundraiser can help. But really what I see organizations benefiting from more is if you have the money to hire someone, hire a grant writer. Hire someone who can help you apply for grants. That is generally what I'm seeing be much more successful than professional fundraisers. Again, I would suggest looking at that contract and being wary of language that says, I get X percentage of the funds of the grants you receive. First, because grants are very often restricted, and if they get too much, you're going to be in trouble. You'll have to find another way of paying them. And second, because it just isn't best practice to do that. Have a flat fee, monthly fee, whatever it is, but not a percentage-based fee. But yeah, I would say there are good reasons to use a professional fundraiser, but it's usually on if you're an organization that does lots of fundraising events. Whereas grant writing is really where I'm seeing the money being made currently. The final topic for today is rules for being a fiscal sponsor. You are a 501c3, so you've already met the first requirement for being a fiscal sponsor. You have to be a 501c3 to sponsor other organizations. Being a fiscal sponsor means that you are in effect lending your C3 status to another organization that doesn't have C3 status, or to a group of people that aren't quite yet ready to be an organization on their own. Sometimes these are people who are this is a group of people who are never going to make their own 501c3. They're always going to operate under your umbrella. Sometimes these are people who are testing the waters. Is this something that could survive on its own? Until we figure that out, we become a program, an activity of a bigger 501c3 who can help us. We borrow their 501c3 status. And we use that in order to raise funds that are tax deductible, those donations, that money to perform the services we want to. In being a fiscal sponsor, you are going to want to have a written fiscal sponsor agreement. That is a contract between you and the group, the people, the parties that you are sponsoring. That contract is going to say what it is that they're doing for you, either the program they're doing or all the work or a broad description of the work they're doing, maybe the time frame of the relationship, whether the intention is that they would eventually fly out of the nest on their own, or whether they will eventually just disappear or be absorbed by your organization. And it will also include the most important element, and that is it will tell them that they can only use the money for 501c3 purposes. And if they do not use the money that they receive from you for 501c3 purposes, you can get it all back. They must pay it all back. And that if they decide not to move forward with the project, they do not get to take that money with them. It belongs to your organization unless they gain their own 501c3 status. If they get their own 501c3 status, perhaps the agreement says they get to take that money with them. That is generally how they're formatted. But if they do not have C3 status and they're like, we're done, we don't want to do this anymore, the money is yours. Now, if that money received was a restricted grant, you have to use it with its restrictions. But if it was just a general donation, you can just fold it back into the organization's general monies. Any questions on fiscal sponsorship arrangements? All right. I know we're close on time, so I don't know whether people want to ask questions now or assemble their questions and email them to me. I don't want to steal too much of the other topics that need to be covered. One of them sounds delicious, so I want you to be able to get to it.
Well, I'd just like to say thank you for this. It was very informative.
Thank you, Cordelia.
Of course, I love doing board trainings, so it is actually a highlight for me. And Gail said in the comments, send Gail your questions and Gail will pass them on to me. So I am happy to receive those and answer them. Again, my response, I'll send it to Gail and then Gail can share it with the rest of the board. And that will be how I communicate with you all.
Thank you so much.
So if you're done with me, I'm sad I'm not going to hear about this ice cream social. Please send me the invitation, but I am going to head out. All right.
Thank you. Has everybody had the opportunity to look at the minutes from May 11th, the board minutes, so we can vote on those today? Yeah. All right. Make a motion to vote.
Did we receive those today? I'm sorry, I didn't see those in my email.
The board minutes were actually sent out just after last week's meeting. I sent them out immediately after the meetings.
Yeah.
Apologies, I see it now.
Jen, did you have a question? I saw your hand pop up.
Oh, no, it's just playing with my hair. Sorry.
Your hair looks great, girl.
I can confirm that you did send them out right away.
Do we
So
need
are we looking for a motion here?
I would like to make a motion that we approve these notes.
Thank you. Is there a second? Jen, you second?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gail and Jen, and
Yes.
all those in favor. Brad, I didn't see your hand up. Are you abstaining or? Okay, I think that is Margaret, did your hand pop up? It's hard with people's cameras off, but I too have my camera off, so I understand. Bueller, Margaret.
I think from a process standpoint, if we're not getting a response, that's an abstention.
Yeah.
Margaret was having some trouble with her connection. She is dialing in from the coast.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Andrew, for that point of order there.
Did you get the show of hands? I didn't see them all.
I did. I think it was everybody voting yes, and then Margaret with an abstention.
Okay, thank you. So they passed. And our next agenda item, discussion about the ice cream social. I guess the one thing that I'm a little concerned about is going to the public safety meeting is that numbers are starting to go up again. I know we wanted to talk about having an ice cream social. They're usually in August, I believe.
Yes.
I feel like maybe we should wait on that. Anybody want to discuss it?
I have a question. I have a question.
Jen, go ahead.
Thank you. So let's say that we don't get into a horrible mess with the COVID rising. Do we have the funds? Would our treasurer know if we had the funds to, like last year we used the truck, we rented out the truck. If we couldn't do that, then we could ask for donations from this local businesses. They're pretty good about it. If we want to be out there. Just my
The funds that were used last year, we were able to use it from one of the grants, and that's how we paid for it, because it also tied into the COVID, I believe it was, awareness. So this year it would come out of our funds, our general funds. And yeah, I'm kind of waiting for all the banking information to finish so Andrew and I can sit down and look at everything. But last year it was funds from there. Go ahead, Anand.
So I've talked with a couple of other people about it, and we're thinking that if we could do the truck thing again, that would probably be the safest. So, I don't know if the funds are there. You said you were going to look into that, but I think as you noted, and as I mentioned before, things are going up, and it probably wouldn't be safe to be having a whole crowd of people all together like that. So that's all I have to say about it.
Dilenia, I think I don't know if you see the hands up there. Just double checking. Yeah.
Yeah, I see your hand. I see Gail, and I thought I saw Dan also somewhere. But I saw Dan's hand first. Dan, did you not raise your hand? Andrew, if you want to go.
Gail was actually in front of me. Gail can go.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to suggest that we table this conversation until closer to the time period. It feels very early to even talk about it. We don't know how transmission might be in August. We don't know how transmission might be in March, but I mean in June. So I would suggest that we table this conversation for a later meeting.
sounds good.
Don't totally disagree. I just had my hand up. I'll just comment really quickly. My personal feeling is that if we're using general fund money, I don't really think there's a ton of value, but convince me I'm wrong in just buying the neighborhood ice cream. I would really like to see us spend our money on events that can build community. And if that's not a safe thing to do, then maybe we just hold on to that money until we can throw a nice neighborhood party with some ice cream. Seems like a better use of funds. I'll also just say one thing I've been trying to be better at is we've been, and this isn't an argument to do it, just something that I've been thinking about, which is that for a long time we said, hey, regardless of your personal feelings, like just follow public health officials. So maybe our collective personal feelings overrule, we don't want to do something unsafe in the neighborhood, but I do think it's important to stick with that. And if public health officials say it's okay to have an outside party, while I might personally not feel super comfortable with it, it's part of the discussion. Maybe if we all are like, hey, public health just isn't ready to do maybe what they need to do, then we should do what we need to do to keep the neighborhood safe. But just throwing it out there because we did push the message, follow public health officials. And I think we should listen to public health officials. And Anand, you know what they're saying much more than I do. I look at you as our expert, so you lead us on that.
Anand, did you want to speak on that?
I'm sorry, I was letting other people go first. I just want to repeat what we said in the meeting just before that, which is we have increased the number of people in the hospitals by about 2.5 times compared to last month. We have gotten out of the green and are now firmly in the orange. It isn't on the CDC site just yet, but this is internal stuff at Lane County. So actually, I probably shouldn't even be telling you that. But nonetheless, things are going up. And so, yeah, it's a thing.
Well, I'll just say it sounds like public health officials are saying that it's not a safe thing to do anymore. So that
mainly what they're recommending is if you're going to do anything indoors, it's probably a good idea to start wearing masks again. But there aren't any mandates as far as it goes.
We can hash this out. I like Gail's suggestion. Let's see where we are in August. Maybe we'll get a spike and then it'll go back down. Hopefully not. Hopefully there's no spike, but we just don't know.
Fred, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in with what Andrew said, where he said, follow what the public health community is saying. And my problem with that is twofold. Part of it is they leave a lot of leeway for interpretation. So when they take away mandates and they say, do what you feel is safe for you, I feel like what they're telling us to do is what Anand's saying. Hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing things that gather people together while there's an ongoing pandemic. And particular, if you look at what's happening with this virus, I don't know if you know what the term R naught means, but it means basically how transmissible it is. This thing has just blown up to where things you could get away with even 4 months ago, you're really at risk if you do it now. And I feel like what we're doing is to take that public health thing back. I was a researcher on the bench, biological sciences researcher, back when HIV broke loose. We didn't call it HIV, we called it LAV or HTLV4. But if you go back and you were like in the mid 80s, and Dianne Feinstein became mayor of San Francisco, and no one in public health had the guts to say, hey, this thing is fully transmissible by sexual activities. And so she left the bathhouses open and she killed thousands of people by doing that. She was following what public health was saying, the official public health. But those of us in the field were saying, oh my Lordy God, we've got to shut this stuff down. And so I really actually disagree with following what public health says. I think we should follow what the scientists who have been right say to do. And that's my 2 cents on that.
Gail, are you making a motion to table, correct?
I am making a motion to table this conversation for at least 1 month and bring it back up at our next board of directors meeting. Do I have a second?
A second.
And a vote? Okay, looks like it passed to go ahead and table that. And the next discussion is the Whiteaker cleanup. So with the Whiteaker cleanup, we should probably table it, but let's go ahead and finish that out real quick. I'm not sure if everybody knows, but Wayne Love was the person who used to do the Whiteaker cleanup. And now he's decided that he's not going to do the cleanup anymore. And I wanted to see if there was any ideas. I thought maybe hitting up some of the businesses and seeing if maybe they wanted to sponsor the Whiteaker cleanup. I think the big deal about the Whiteaker cleanup was the party afterwards. But again, that's more like a public health, like a public safety thing. But just something to be aware of. The cleanup's not happening anymore, and I don't know if it's something we should think about to like continue. Thank you. And then anytime, go ahead.
There's Sharice wants to talk.
Go ahead, Sharice.
It's Saoirse.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I had my hand up from when we were voting and I forgot to take it down. Sorry about that, y'all.
Thank you, Saoirse. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're good.
And as far as any other future topics, anybody want to bring anything up? All right, it looks like we are over. I want to thank everybody, and you guys have a great night.